Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm hoping that your Lesson 5 activities went well. As a matter of fact, I know they went well because you were more than prepared to do them. Now we're going to jump into Lesson 6, Week 2. Again, this is Grade 11 ELA Unit 6, and we're going to get going on our next day of activities. So just an overview from yesterday to remind us what we've accomplished. So Day 1. We read A Fast-Changing Society there. You read some questions and did a reflection. The overall purpose of doing that text was to give you background for today's story. Today's story is Everyday Use by Alice Walker. It is going to be a good time. But before we get any further, I want to remind you, and hopefully you did this yesterday, that when you complete your lessons and activities for the day, that you make sure that you share your learning with someone there. It will only make things stick even further in your brains when you do that. That you do the weekly fluency activity using a page from the text that we're reading that day, and that you do an additional 20 minutes of reading. That's leisurely, that's something that you've chosen to do, again, just to get into that reading practice. And you may find that you read things a little bit differently now that we're going through these protocols. Jumping into our warm-up for the day, let's get those brains going. Our riddle of the day. Do you have everybody around you? Are you ready? Okay, here we go. I am as light as a feather, yet the strongest person can't hold me for 5 minutes. What am I? This is your courtesy pause moment to be able to stop the video so that I don't spoil things for you. You're going to resist the urge to Google. You're going to gather others and challenge them, because in a moment I'm going to reveal the answer. What am I, according to this riddle? Your breath. Again, light as a feather, strongest person can't hold me past 5 minutes. Right? That's another clever one that you can pull out. Make sure that other people get stumped, just in case you did too. Resources and materials to make sure that we are prepared for today. You're going to need the story Everyday Use. That's the text that we're coming out of. That's in your learning packet. You're going to need your Week 2 Lesson 6 overview, as well as a note catcher to record what you're learning, pen or pencil, and as always, an optional device, whether it's a smartphone or something else, if you wanted to access the text digitally. Again, you always have that overview of the lesson, and each section of the lesson corresponds with, if necessary, a part in the note catcher for you to record. So again, our protocols are, we're going to, again, read, think, talk, write, close. And today, you're going to be talking through some things. Our learning targets are, I can read and summarize the background and plot of everyday use. I can record my ideas and questions about the characters and events as I read the story. And just like every day, again, you're going to go through that protocol of read, think, talk, write. And we're going to get to do that about the story Everyday Use by Alice Walker. So just to give you brief background information, you will find some additional information at the beginning of the story. Author we've already discussed, but the setting is a time period that's likely mid-century. We call mid-century sometimes 1960s to early 1970s. We know this particular story was published in the early 1970s by Walker. But that is one of the reasons why you read A Fast-Changing Society yesterday, because we wanted you to have some background information about the time period, and that's going to help you get a better feel for the characters and what's actually going on. Let's also revisit our essential question for the unit. So what do stories reveal about the human condition? We talked about that a lot. This story is going to point toward some other aspects of the human condition that I hope are fleshed out as we engage in additional readings. And then the specific question for this particular text, the guiding question, is a good one. What factors lead a person to accept, reject, or feel neutral about his or her heritage? Now that is a good talking question. Like even beyond once the story is done, I think that you and someone else will probably be having that discussion long after this video. So I'm excited to get you going and thinking about that. This is our first read. So as always, I'm going to model the type of thinking and activity that you're going to be engaged in when we're done with this video. We're going to go with the first paragraph in the text, and actually we're going to break up this first read into 2 sections. So we're only going to read pages 765 to 770 today, and make sure that we just really pull apart this text as we're reading and understand what's going on before we move on to the back half of the story. So we're going to start with paragraph 1. I will wait for her in the yard that Maggie and I made so clean and wavy yesterday afternoon. A yard like this is more comfortable than most people know. It is not just a yard, it is like an extended living room. When the hard clay is swept clean as a floor and the fine sand around the edges lined with tiny, irregular grooves, anyone can come and sit and look up into the elm tree and wait for the breezes that never come inside the house. Maggie will be nervous until after her sister goes. She will stand hopelessly in corners, homely and ashamed of the burn scars down her arms and legs, eyeing her sister with a mixture of envy and awe. She thinks her sister has held life always in the palm of one hand, that no is a word that the world never learned to say to her. So, as I read, I'm going to underline the background and setting sections. I'm going to be boxing any unfamiliar vocabulary and phrases. And I'm going to be writing down thoughts, feelings, or questions that come up as I read the text. So we've already read through this particular paragraph once. And one of the things that I'd like to underline is the background and setting. So I know that we are looking at a story taking place in a yard. And it's not just a yard, it's like an extended living room. So that gives us an idea of how the characters in the story use this portion of their property, right? So they're sitting out there just like you would in a living room. And then they describe the actual ground. And it says, when the hard clay is swept clean as a floor and fine sand around the edges lined with tiny irregular grooves. And it talks about an elm tree as well. The description of this yard makes me think that this may take place in a rural area, because for the most part, if you're, in another area, if you're kind of in more of a city, you're not seeing a huge yard like this that could be used as a living room, socializing, and not necessarily clay ground. And so clay typically is something associated with southern states. So it makes me think that maybe this story is taking place in that area or that region of the country. I boxed the term homely. I'm somewhat familiar with it. I box it because it's not something that people use typically anymore, but usually it's referring to someone that's kind of plain and not attractive, potentially even ugly, which I would say that's the harshest interpretation of the term. And then finally, my thoughts and feelings so far. And so I'm thinking about this character, Maggie, who's mentioned in the first line. So I know that she's going to play a major role in this particular story. That's what it seems like. And a lot of description so far is dedicated to who she is as a person. And then talking about Maggie's sister. And it seems like Maggie gets nervous whenever her sister comes home. And I'm wondering whether or not, because Maggie thinks so fondly of her, treats her with awe, whether or not she carries herself the same way. So does Maggie's sister behave as if she's better than everyone else? Does Maggie treat her this way because her sister expects it? I don't know yet, because it's only paragraph 1. So we're going to find out later. And as you read, you're going to find out more. So now that I've modeled engaging in the annotations for the first read, as always, it is your turn. So you're going to go ahead and do the same types of annotations outlined in the think box. Then you're going to move on to the questions for today outlined in the talk section. So you're going to talk with a friend, family member, or caregiver about the prompt. If you had to choose an item that you currently own to become an heirloom, what would it be and why? And so just to clarify, an heirloom is something that is a family typically has, and eventually over time it gets passed down person to person. So it stands the test of time. It reflects the family's, collective history. It means something, and it goes generation to generation. So if you had something currently in your possession, it may not seem like something huge now, but that could potentially turn into an heirloom that you pass along. What would it be and why? So that's a really good talking point. Whether it's with, again, a friend, family member, or caregiver, what in your possession right now would you eventually think could become an heirloom? You're then going to write in response to some questions asking you to clarify what you know about the story so far in the first half. And then the closing activity is pretty fun as well. This is you getting to know a little bit about the city of Detroit during this era, the 1960s and 1970s. So if you know someone, friend, family member, neighbor that lived in the city during this time period, ask them how things were. And then as you're reading the story, you can see if you see some similar ideas. So if this particular family from the story, for example, is from a rural area that we suspect, a lot of people moved during a time period called the Great Migration from down south up to areas like Detroit. So they may definitely relate to this story. So it's a good conversation starter. If you don't know someone who was here during the 1960s and 70s, try the Detroit Historical Museum online. Check them out. They have Detroit's history. You may find out some things you didn't know. If you are engaged in these activities and you need some additional help, as always, you can email a teacher. You can pause and replay the video as many times as necessary, but I think you're going to be good. Use all your strategies and tools to your advantage. And then finally, remember that when you complete these lessons for the day, that you share your learning with a family member, friend, or caregiver, you complete your weekly fluency activity, and you do some additional recreational reading for at least 20 minutes. So our time together has come to an end again. I am so grateful to spend additional time with you, and I'm excited about you reading the story. I think you're really going to like it. And I hope that you engage in some really, really good conversations with the people around you. We'll see you back tomorrow, and we'll finish out this story.